Many soldiers who were in the military at the time have talked about the president's appearance to them. You know, he addressed them on the morning of the rally when they came from Todi and all of that. The president came down in the morning in his morning robe and his pajamas to talk to these soldiers before they were deployed. And his was an approach of an appeal. And it dawned on many young fellas that, you know, this question of the military being the bedrock of the authority of the state, and that they had some powers. The rank and file of the military began to feel his own power.
Not confident in his own soldiers, Talbot requested support from the President of Guinea, who sent in troops to calm the situation, infuriating the Liberian army. Now under intense pressure, Talbot was forced to release the organizers of the demonstration.
The organizers of that demonstration were granted amnesty and are now free, enjoying all the political and human rights of Liberian citizens, including the right to form and manage their own political organization and to use their headquarters for that purpose, with the express provision by government that they operate within the limits of the laws of Liberia.
But his authority was undermined. He appeared ineffectual and weak.
Some months ago,
by now, he had lost support in the army, he had lost the support of his party, and he had lost support in the streets. In the capital, there was talk of rebellion.
One could sense that unless we could break some impasse, you know, there were violent disruptions on the horizon.
In the early morning of April 12, 1980, a group of enlisted men entered the executive mansion and fought their way into the presidential quarters. President Talbot was shot and disemboweled. The man who led the assault was Samuel Kayando, a 28-year-old master sergeant with an 8th grade education, leader of Liberia's first military coup.
We know that what you have done has never happened before in the history of Liberia, but it was most necessary because of the following reasons. There has been uncontrollable corruption.
The military, which earned $80 a month under Talbot, were promised an immediate reward.
Already, we are directed that all enlisted men and men of the armed forces of Liberia and law enforcement agencies to be paid at least $250 a month.
At first, much of the country seemed jubilant. A man of the soil, it was said, would finally rule Liberia. Some even went so far as to compare Doe to an earlier savior.
Jesus Christ was born unto a poor man and in the stable among animals. David the Israelite, destroyer of Goliath, a poor shepherd boy. Head of state Samuel Kayando, a master sergeant. Member of the People's Redemption Council. Member of the People's Redemption Council, sergeants and enlisted men. The analogy is drawn in history.
People came from all parts of the country to celebrate. Like the majority of the people, Doe was from one of the indigenous tribes. His supporters thought of the coup as getting rid of Americo-Liberian domination.
The so-called Americo-Liberians have come into a society that they didn't understand, and quite frankly refused to understand over the years, either out of fear or out of ignorance or just out of the sheer incapacity or inability to comprehend the dynamics of this society.
The coup leader's People's Redemption Council prepared a list of enemies of the state. It included members of the Talbot family and current and former government officials.
This is Mika Television coming to you from the Potstaki, where
Talbot's cabinet was stripped, paraded in public, and humiliated. All were damned as Americo-Liberian.
Monday, April 14th.
The cabinet Talbot had 80%. And even those so-called Americo-Liberian, all the parents were not Americo-Liberians. You see? So, but it was something that had been ingrained into them, etc. And so they came up with that. And that it is our time now.
The army moved swiftly to arrest and prosecute so-called enemies of the people. At the Ministry of Justice, a series of trials took place. Indigenous cabinet ministers such as Jackson Doe tried desperately to disassociate themselves from the fallen regime.
Officials of my background, I would like to put it that way, sat down and watched many things happen. This is why I started off by congratulating the head of state and members of the People's Redemption Council for this change.
Please tell us how many houses, lots, and or farms do you own?
Jackson Doe's life was spared, but others were not so fortunate. The trials were organized by the new Justice Minister, Che Chipo. His predecessor was his foster father, who was about to be executed. The foster father was Americo-Liberian, while Chipo was indigenous. So here, in effect, is Chipo washing his hands of his father's death.
The tribunal deemed it necessary in their judgment to have found the gravity of the crime to be equal to a death penalty. So they imposed that penalty. Then I don't know in what manner I have anything to do with it.
Will you allow us to have a copy of the judgment?
On the day of the executions of the 13 people, I was in my classroom in the university, and some reporter came and told me, say, they're going to have some executions, but they've delayed them because there are not enough polls. And that was an ominous sign of what was to come. I sort of packed my bags and went home, took a bath, and went to bed, feeling sick, very, very sick.
My father, whose family had immigrated to Liberia from Nigeria and Sierra Leone, had once been a leader of Talbot's party. When the new Doe government demanded that former officials turn themselves in, he complied and found himself sharing a cell with some of the men who had been sentenced to death.
The sun was up, everything was bright and clear, but all of a sudden, everything became dark. A storm. But we were in the cell. We did not know why. We could not account for it. But everything went bad. It really stormed. The day was dull, very, very dull. It's a dismal day.
In this atmosphere of random justice, my father was released. But 13 others were awaiting execution. Of those, only 4 had actually been sentenced to death, and 2 had been recommended for pardon. The bodies were dumped in a mass grave. In the days following the revolution, people chanted, "Indigenous women give birth to heroes." Americo-Liberian women give birth to thieves. At his first press conference, sitting with his mother, Doe looked less like a victorious leader than a man who had triggered events he hardly controlled. He didn't know who many of the executed ministers were, nor did he understand the complexities of the task ahead.
So can you tell us what plans you have for the country immediately?
I can't tell you now. Can't tell you.
We know that.
Yeah, you see, you know that.
What are the main problems facing the country, do you think?
No problem.
If you were to identify one particular area of the country's economy or its justice, which would you say you will become more interested in?
Well, the Minister of Economy can elaborate on that one.
Yes.
Sir, would you be changing your policy or reviewing your policy with the United States government?
We'll still continue on the old policy.
Yes.
Thank you.
Praise for the coup came from Libya, Ethiopia, Cuba, and other Eastern Bloc countries. U.S. condemnation of the killings was swift. Yet 6 weeks after the coup, a previously scheduled American delegation arrived to offer support.
To have the opportunity to come and visit with you and the other officials of your government to discuss the needs of your peoples and to also discuss future relations between our two nations.
Samuel Doe represented a rebellion of the country people, the original inhabitants, the population of Liberia, the majority being country people, sort of like that. It showed that the Americo-Liberians were no longer dominant, and there was a popular change. So the United States had no reason to change that, or try to go against that, and we accepted Samuel Doe like the people of Liberia did.
They had no idea of the workings of the international political system. They had no concrete, more rational understanding of the social dynamics on the ground. So within a year or two, that government, the People's Redemption Council, became more corrupt than all the governments that preceded it.
But for the Americans, particularly Ronald Reagan, the new Cold War warrior in the White House, Doe was a useful ally.
It's been a pleasure to welcome Liberian Head of State Samuel K. Doe on his first visit to the United States. It's especially fitting that we should be meeting this year as the United States and Liberia celebrate 120 years of diplomatic relations. Our discussions gave us an opportunity to reaffirm the special friendship and mutual respect between our two countries. Clearly, a firm bond unites Liberians and Americans who have come together professionally and socially throughout the years.
The U.S. strategy for Liberia was spelled out in the then classified White House document. Liberia was important to protect valuable U.S. facilities and military access rights, to protect U.S. private investment, to prevent the spread of Libyan, Soviet, and other hostile influences. And, because of the unusual historic relationship, to avoid a major defeat or embarrassment for the United States through Liberia's political or economic disintegration. This was Doe's proudest moment. He did everything Washington wanted, including criticizing other African states for not being sufficiently anti-communist. He also challenged some African leaders to fistfights for insulting Ronald Reagan.
Doe also at the time was said to have learned how to speak English better by watching the great communicator communicate on videotape. And he had a satellite dish set up so that he could watch all of Reagan's speeches.